following program on Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
Tonight, we delve into the legal landscape relating to animal welfare. Do already existing legislature provide adequate protection to the most vulnerable species? And how drastically will the proposed animal welfare bill alter the position that animals have in Sri Lanka for the better? A very good evening and thank you for joining us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we bring to you key legal concepts and break it down for the layman. Tonight's topic is not something that is new to any of us, and that's on animal rights and animal welfare. Now, I know this topic we have previously touched quite a few years ago when it comes to this program in itself, and we spoke about the developments in the field. But right now we see multiple advancements in the field as well, especially when regarding the animal welfare bill that is still yet to come into enactment. So we do have quite a bit to unpack in this discussion, and to speak about this we have someone, I believe, who is a very qualified individual, not a new face on the show. You are very well acquainted with him, and that is Attorney at Law Udara Soysa. Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to be here with us and explain this topic to us today. A little bit of an introduction on Attorney at Law Udara Soysa. He is a published author specifically in this area as well, which is why we have brought him onto the program today. He's a senior law lecturer and he's a lecturer in charge for international law for postgraduate programs at the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies at BMICH. Well, before we get into the discussion, here's a bit of a breakdown on how we're going to approach this topic, since there is quite a bit to address. First of all, we'll be talking about the existing legislatures. What's the current climate of animal welfare in Sri Lanka, especially when it comes to the ordinance that's already in place to protect our four-legged friends. Next, we'll be talking about the actual animal welfare bill that is to be implemented. How exactly will it change the legal legislature? Is there going to be serious upheavals of the currently existing legislature? And finally, we'll be talking about how Sri Lanka will fare in an international context once the bill comes into place.
Hello, I'm Medini and I'm a management student. My question is on the current climate of animal welfare. Do we see a positive trend in how Sri Lanka society approaches animal rights?
All right, well, without any further ado, let's get right into this very packed discussion. We have quite a lot of issues to discuss at the moment when it comes to this specific topic. It's unwinding as we speak. There's a lot of noise and a lot of discussion around this topic. It has been since quite a while, actually, a decade, I believe. Sir, could you start us off before we get into anything regarding the animal welfare bill in itself? I feel like it's important that we discuss the currently existing legislature. Could you please explain to us the history of how the currently existing prevention of cruelty against animals ordinance actually came into being, and the other legislature surrounding that? Could you tell us a little bit of a historical approach and also how it's currently being implemented?
Perfect. Actually, a little bit of a correction, Anuradhi, to what you said. Not a decade. It's more than a decade. Literally like over 15 years of work on this bill, progress, evolution on this bill. But as per the current ordinance, you know, anything, I mean, we live in 2024. So when we have a ordinance that is over 100 years old, this doesn't fit, I mean, chronologically, and, you know, it's common sense that ordinance or legislation that is over 100 years old will not be fitting for the modern society. So the first thing that we have to start up is the fact that this is entirely outdated. This is totally, entirely, absolutely outdated, and there's no discussion about that. And I think it's just very few laws that we have in Sri Lanka that is as outdated as this ordinance on animals, right? So now you might ask the question, how this is outdated? The pertinent question is how it is not outdated. Everything is outdated, I would say. You know, if you look at a fine, right, you can literally go on the road and slit a throat of an innocent dog as you go out of Derana. You can do something absolutely as cruel as that and nothing will happen. 100 rupees. 100 rupees. Recently, there was a case in Gampa area, right, where I think perhaps your news broadcast must have carried that, where owner of two hybrid dogs, right, very very higher type dogs, literally put petrol and burnt a male dog that came to that area, instinctively to mate. And we have to really thank the learned magistrate for pushing the issue and remanding this person. But technically, within the framework, there is not even much that a judge could do, because the framework is very, very narrow. Unless the judge goes out of the way to ensure justice for these animals, it would be just a 100 rupee fine. Not only this 100 rupee fine, there is no enforcement. In fact, even the very definition of animals in the current ordinance is outdated. There is no clear definition. There is never in most of the civilized world such ambiguous definition of who's animal. So definitions are outdated, fines are outdated. In fact, there is no authority to enforce it. Without any authority, it is never possible to enforce things. You can have certain legal frameworks, and they are very weak legal frameworks. On top of the weaker framework, the current ordinance doesn't recommend or doesn't provide for any or activate any enforcement mechanisms for the welfare of the animals, right? On top of that, there is a little like 3 months time limit to take action. So coupled with all these time limits, minimum, like what can you do with 100 rupee fine? Anybody would pay 100 rupee fine. Like nobody would care about this. So I think coupled with all these problems, I think today this is something that should end up in trash. The current ordinance, it's not suitable. Actually, it's not suitable for any legal consumption. Should be immediately it should be replaced with something new.
Considering all the issues that are to do with the existing ordinance, so what exactly did it imply and what exactly did it enforce in any aspect? Because we see that the fines are completely negligible, the time frames, and even the authority you mentioned, the enforcement of the entire ordinance is coming under question. So what exactly did the currently existing ordinance do for the protection of animals in Sri Lanka?
Now, 120 years ago, 100 rupees is a big amount, as you know, right? And even some lands you could have bought for 500 rupees. 250 rupees I've seen in my notary practice sometimes, some older consideration for certain land, so also that much. So I think maybe 120 years back, this could have suited some purposes to, keep people in check, it is almost like a kind of like a on the spot thing, right? You do something wrong, you have to pay 100 rupees. So because you are scared of paying the 100 rupees, you won't do it, right? So historically, maybe 100 years ago, it did a role in stopping certain behaviors and making people think twice before being cruel. However, that stopped there. It never, laws are just, like almost like a living being. Laws should evolve. If the law doesn't evolve, it will just collapse. And I think that is what have happened. So it served a purpose 100 years ago, I'm sure, right? But maybe for the last 50, 60 years, I think literally nothing, right? And we'll discuss the reasons of that and with the provisions of the new bill, which God knows whether it will be enacted anytime soon. It's been there for a while, but anyway, that will be our next part of the discussion.
We do have to move on to that area, but before we do, I'd like to ask you a bit of a general question, sir, when it comes to animal welfare in general in Sri Lanka. What do you see is the current climate in Sri Lanka right now? Do we see a change, a positive trend, especially in the society, of course, let alone the legal fraternity and the legislative aspects? Do you see a positive trend towards the protection and the advocacy of rights for animals in Sri Lanka?
Indeed so, Anurad, indeed so. As I said, with some recent cases also, we've seen lawyers getting involved. We've seen judges, pushing the boundaries to ensure justice for these animals. So, in my humble opinion, I think, yes, I think the or even for the last 16 years, if it's not for the voluntary hard work, tireless work of these animal activists and lawyers who really have a compassion towards these helpless animals, right, helpless beings, this bills have progressed, right? But though the climate, the culture is promoting these new bills, etc., I think when it comes to the parliament level, it just evaporates. It's like a mysterious disease that happens to these bills when it goes there. Like it's unbelievable. For 6 years, Anuradhi, from 2000 to 2006. Over 70 odd submissions. The best lawyers got together, right? Best lawyers in the law commission, they got together and they came up with this piece of legislation. And from 2006, it's now the recent one, 2022, 2023, right? So it's unbelievable how 16 years, 6 years in terms of consultation, 16 years in waiting, we are still not seeing any progress, and this is extremely unfortunate. This is unbelievable for we call ourselves very proud Sinhalese Buddhist nation, etc., but we are unable to pass a very basic legislation about animal rights. This is pathetic, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, there's been so much pushback and so much dilly-dallying when it comes to the implementation of such a vital bill, specifically considering how our culture towards animals, it has been a very humane culture as well. We haven't had, specific issues when it comes to even treating our animals in any way, because we have an integral connection with them, especially with our agricultural roots. So it's important for us to look into the actual animal welfare bill now that you've mentioned it. Could you please introduce to us the concept of the animal welfare bill and how exactly it changes, or how exactly it aims to change the current climate that has been set and put in place by the existing and decrepit ordinance?
Excellent. So between 2000 and 2006, with numerous consultations, we've had from 2006 this bill. Almost all the presidents, right, from President Mahinda Rajapaksa to Maithripala Sirisena to President Gotabaya, all of the presidents have been very favorable towards this bill, right? So politically, at some level, I think a lot of these people have a soft corner for the animals. Right? But when it comes to practical enforcement, it gets stuck. So let's have a look at the basic framework of this bill itself. What are some positive developments? Now, it's a bit complex for you to understand, or for anybody to understand, I think, because this bill is like evolving, like from 2006 for almost till now, it's been evolving, changing, adding, removing, watering down, then again fine-tuning. So this is like, imagine a document that just grew over 17 years. So, you see some discrepancy between today's bill to what was in 2006 as well. But in summary, I will explain you the gist of the summary of the document that we have so far. I think the most positive development, I think, is the fact that a good enforcement mechanism with enforcement members have been recommended, right? So an authority, some argue that we should go for an advisory committee, whatever it is, right? Having an authority to protect, enforce, to ensure and oversee the protections is very, I think, is a very positive thing. So rather than just making a law and just hoping that the law would take care of it, and with other laws also, right, when it comes to child protection laws, the wonderful work that is done by the child protection authorities, right? Same thing with, despite its weaknesses when it even come to consumer protection, some work is being done by this authority. So having an authority, Anuradhi, is vital. And the bill stipulates, who are disqualified, who are allowed, and different stakeholders putting their members. So I think establishing an authority under the purview of this act is a very positive development. Secondly, increasing fines. As you know, I'm sure on the way back, 100 rupees, even sometimes the beggars will not take 100 rupees now, because with the inflation, like the value of money has gone so down. So for 100 rupees, I don't think anybody cares about 100 rupees, right? So now increase almost to 150,000, right? 1,50,000. So that's something that would make you think, because just having, fining somebody 100 rupees versus 150,000 rupees, then, you tighten the screw a little bit, Anuradhi, by tightening the screw, because, in our culture, which is a bit sad, unless you actually put certain sanctions, certain punishments, people don't get it, because people just don't care unless you have, these sanctions. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, societies can be gauged, society's worth can be gauged with the way we treat animals. The fact that we have just 100 rupees is like a joke of a fine, now moving to 150,000, that I think also, in my opinion, I wouldn't say fining, sanctions is, in like Austinian sense, I don't think sanctions is the only way forward, but I think that is one way forward, right, together with authority, right, a start. Because once you start fining people, and you will see people start thinking, like, this is not worth, it's not worth me just, putting this innocent dog in fire, and, it's not worth for this 150,000. So people might, money talks, right? People might start thinking in terms of that also. Secondly, there are other various provisions, like, this very important, this concept of duty of care. So for example, if you are in custody of an animal, you have a duty of care. It's just like as a doctor or anybody who has custody of a living being, right? You have a duty of care to protect. So that this duty of care concept has been, formulated, has been cemented in the bill, which I think is also a wonderful development, which gives people this additional responsibility, not just having animal, just letting them die. Recently in Minuwangoda, I've did a case where a dog was given to a boarding house, not registered also, and ultimately the dog died of not being fed. A very beautiful dog, and there's a before and after photos would just kill your heart, right? So what people do is just this person just on Facebook advertised, right, for a boarding house. And I think, I'm not going to say the name, very well known social media star actress. Now she's funding a lot of these animal work. Now, out of her good heart, this social media influencer actress, they are paying money for these boarding houses to keep these street dogs. And what these boarding house people does is they take the money of these people who are giving out of good faith and not feeding the dogs, and dogs are dying. And ultimately the dog died. Dogs died, and these people just stole the money. And the duty of care, if the current ordinance had this level of duty of care, these people who ran this boarding house, whether registered or unregistered, they would clearly be violated on the provisions, and they'll be held liable. But now, since we don't have a duty of care standard, people are open to do whatever they want.
Exactly. So that is exactly a key factor of this bill as well. The fact that an animal is not just property, but the fact that there's duty of care owed to an animal. It would be quite a first in our legal landscape as well. Unfortunately, we have come to time in this segment. We still have quite a bit to discuss when it comes to the key features of the Animal Welfare Bill and what exactly it proposes to change and how it's going to revolutionize the landscape in protecting animals. Before we speak about any of that, let's go in for a very short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. Stay with us.
Hello. My name is Danuji Viragon and I am a student of grade 10. My question is on the Animal Welfare Bill. Is the bill a good enough solution to address gaps in the existing legislature?
Welcome back. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We are in discussion with attorney at law Udara Soysa, and we were talking about the Animal Welfare Bill. We just touched on some of the key features, and we left off on duty of care and how it's actually quite a positive change. It's almost revolutionary in the aspect because now we owe duty of care. Well, if it comes into enactment, we will be owing duty of care to animals, which essentially just upgrades their class to a whole new level. Sir, if we could, I had to unfortunately cut you short in the previous segment. If we could continue to discuss exactly what the key features are of the Animal Welfare Bill and what it hopes to introduce into our legislature at the moment.
So one of the, going back to the earlier discussion, one of the starting point is the fact that if you want to have a productive piece of law, one of the key points is that definitions has to be very clear. Definitions are the heart of any legal argument. If the definitions are not clear, then the law won't be clear, and then the enforcement or efficiency and effectivity would go for a 6. So in the current ordinance, if you look at the definitions, it's outrageous. This gives very haphazard definitions. We are trying to define animals as birds, fish, etc., where it does. When you read it, you are not really sure where the definition of animal starts or ends. It is not clear at all. If you look at Indian law, right, the definition is very clear, where it defines animal as any living being other than human being. And I think that is, if you look at the bill also, that is the current proposed legislature in Sri Lanka as well, which is very simple definition, right? Any living being other than human being. So, whether it's an elephant or whether it's a cow or whether it's a chicken or whether it's a dog, it's an all-encompassing definition that I think is, something that is very positive, because then when the matter is in any argument, any legal argument at courts, then it's very, very, very simple. The animal is very easily defined. So no need to put any qualifications in terms of whether it's 4-legged or 2-legged or whatever, right? So the definition is very clearly, simply given in the bill, which I think is also something quite wonderful. On top of that, you'll see, Anuradhi, now there are some certain customs and practices in Sri Lanka linked to animals that are very inhuman. If you have an extra dog or a cat, sometimes you will think, I cannot take care of this animal, I'm going to go and drop this animal at a temple, right? Or at a church, or just at somewhere. Like I've had situations where, back in the day, some people just leave an animal right by my office sometimes, and leave. Like, some people know that, we love animals, right? But so this is horrible. You have an extra animal, you don't take any duty of care, you rather abandon the animal. So this bill provides specific provisions to deal with that as well, which is, I think, is something that is positive, because people should start treating animals with a high level of humanity. I've seen now with people migrating, sometimes, this very, like old animals they've had, like maybe dogs they had for 10 years or so, they will just, leave somewhere and go. This is horrible for a nation as ours, So the fact that this bill provides provisions even for that, I think is commendable.
There is quite a bit of extra information that has to be included in order to allow for specificity as well, right, sir? Now, a little bit of a question of curiosity when it comes to species as well. Do we see that the Animal Welfare Bill actually has more protections relating to a certain species or a certain class of animals, like mammals, for example? Is it geared more towards that, or do we see a uniform level of protection that is offered and applied for all animals in general?
Okay, perfect question. I'll explain this. Generally, the bill aims to offer a uniform protection. However, right, qualification is that it does offer certain provisions when it comes to certain animals that are being tested for right, in certain pharmaceutical industry or drugs, etc. And you know that, certain cancer drugs, etc., even at medical faculties, etc., you have certain animals that are being tested for that. I mean, that's a whole different, unfortunately, it's a whole different thing. Perhaps maybe that necessary evil, obviously, right? But that is morally, I'm very torn on that. But I do understand that is a provision that almost every single country in the world has kept in the animal protection legislation. So this is, you might say, as a necessary evil or unavoidable situation that may be needed for the a utilitarian greater good of humanity, right? So certain provisions, such as certain classes of animals which are being lab tested, etc., that is allowed under the Act. But generally, this offers a wide uniform protection, and I think that is why this Act has been stuck to a great extent, because a lot of lobbying groups, including, shockingly, certain religious groups as well, because some people might find this Act a bit hostile towards certain even religious practices, right? Whether it's animal sacrifices or whether it's some certain animals which are kept for certain possessions, etc. Because it is not pretty when you go deeper to the level of the animals and try to dig deep. You see certain certain practices that clearly would violate the provisions of this Act. I think this uniform general application or such nature is what has pushed these lobbying groups to ensure this Act has not been enforced. It's 16 years and still counting. Maybe another 16 years, I don't know. So maybe hopefully this will, because everybody thought in 2022 this would come up. It was like everybody thought it was like this close to be enacted, but again it got stuck. I think partly because of the lobbying by certain groups,
right, it's
the meat
interests.
Meat industry to some extent, and we'll discuss that later in maybe the next segment. Certain religious groups, right? Certain other vested groups. I think we are looking for shortcuts, right? We don't want to invest our time and effort to do what is right. If the meat industry or any other industry is going that path, the shortcut, we will never be able to do this. We are looking at profits, sacrificing the animal rights, which that with this Act, with this bill, it's not possible. You will be given the duty of care. You will, doesn't matter for what purpose you're going to hold that, you will be held responsible. And ultimately you need to understand the life is not all about making a profit.
Especially when it comes to other living beings as well, that we have to be in a symbiotic relationship with, considering the intrinsic way that animals are incorporated into our lives. Even as we speak, we owe a lot of our technologies to the development through animals as well. So I think it's important for us to actually discuss, now that you mentioned a bit of a, well, not a shortcoming, but a little bit of a nuance when it comes to the inclusion and protection of animals, where it's not all animals regardless, and there are certain classes that have a little bit of a shortcoming. Could you explain to us a little bit about the key challenges that the bill actually faces, or any shortcomings that you see that should potentially be addressed under the bill?
Sure. So now, for example, I think now when it comes to testing, perhaps we can, now this bill has allowed that, right? Perhaps we can do a bit more research on how animal testing is carried out in other countries, like in developed countries, and use those guidelines, the mechanisms of these testing parameters, and add that to the bill to keep things a bit more clear. What are allowed, what are not allowed in the animal testing, right? Also for certain, like now in the poultry industry as well, certain provisions are there to balance that. But then again, I think keeping provisions wide is a great way of making sure nothing happens, right? So I think to ensure proper enforcement of this bill, I think perhaps we need to do further research. But I mean, I would say that this should be enacted immediately, right? And however, once you enact it, then we have a law in our hand that perhaps, like any other piece of law, it can be amended. So these further amendments can carry any specific guidelines on how this testing, that whole whole formula has to be shaped, and how other poultry or any other industries have to be shaped. So I think these challenges should be overcome gradually, right, in a methodical manner, and I think try to make further changes to this bill will further stall its progress. So my opinion is that the law as it is in this bill should be enforced immediately, right? And once enforced, I mean once passed, obviously you have to pass it to the parliament and then enforce, right? And once you start enforcing, you will understand, okay, these are the problems, these are the good, like what is good about it, what is bad, what is ugly. Yes, we should fine tune it, right? I think focusing further on any further revision will just ensure that for the next 16 years nothing will happen, right? So that's something I think we all should avoid. But I agree with you, right? This is not perfect. And I mean, a lot of people would say there are certain, provisions that are allowed, to make sure that different quarters are kept happy. But I think those things are something for future. But I think, as a whole, this bill is a very positive development.
Right. And sir, going back to your previous discussion as well, where we spoke about how there are certain organizations and certain stakeholders that do not benefit completely from having this bill coming to effect, specifically certain, organizations when it comes to maybe the meat industry or even the agricultural industry. I'm not exactly sure. But sir, could you explain to us how the bill might handle or how the bill might work around such issues that certain industries will have, specifically like the agricultural industry, where animals are an integral component?
I think, in my opinion, I think the bill would actually help them, by offering the limits, right, offering guidelines, etc. The problem, Anuradhi, is that if you see the meat industry in Sri Lanka, it's extremely profit driven. In fact, I think it's unhealthy, right? Certain hormones that are being used for, certain animals, and ultimately, I think perhaps, in fact, these are not only unhealthy for animals, but these are unhealthy for human consumptions as well, right? So my view is the bill doesn't need to really go around it. Like what bill should do is it should provide quite a robust ground, right, for them to operate within the frameworks in the act, right, in the bill within passed act, right. This would ensure that the industries are moving towards the modern standards, and and if you look at how the industry is dealing, I mean not all, but considerable portion of the industry, meat industry, is dealing with animals. It's not something that we can be very happy about. It's all about profits. I'm not saying people should eat meat, right? My point is that this should be done within a framework where it's humane.
If we force certain stakeholders to take accountability and to uphold certain standards for the protection of their animals, in turn we will be having it reflected on our health and our general health as well, because there are better standards for the animals that we will eventually be consuming.
And these standards are for our benefits ultimately, right? So when you look at the modern developed legal frameworks of the developed nations, you see these standards, guidelines, regulations are enforced not because these regulatory bodies want to do it. These frameworks are enforced because it is good for you and me, right? So this is perhaps in short term this will be a problem, right? Now we have to change in the meat industry or any other industry, we have to change the way we are doing things, right? Perhaps some short term losses have to be overcome, but as a whole, as a nation, as a people, as human beings, I think by formulating, right, a framework And in fact, we can develop on this framework even in the meat industry, and the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, the stakeholders. If you are eating meat, you are a stakeholder of all of us are stakeholders of the meat industry. All of us would benefit from these guidelines.
Some temporary short-term discomfort will actually lead to better results in the long term.
Indeed, because that's what happened in US or any other country, Canada. You can see
that's actually a very good point for me to actually discuss further on, specifically when it comes to international standards as well, and how we fare when it comes to the international standards that are currently in place and how it will change over the years if we have the enactment taking place. Before we do that, unfortunately, sir, I'll have to cut you off there. We'll go in for a short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Sasan Vijayaratna and I'm a business student. My question today is on international standards. Can Sri Lanka hope to see an increase in its global standing when it comes to animal rights?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in our final segment in discussing animal welfare and the Animal Welfare Bill with Attorney at Law Udara Soysa. So we just left off on two very momentous topics, two very important and packed segments where we actually discussed what the benefits are of this bill that is trying to be brought in and actually enacted as actual legislature. We just left off on a very important point, the international aspects of the entire animal welfare idea and that landscape. We don't really know how we translate Sri Lankan legislature and the climate in Sri Lanka, how it translates on a global level. Where exactly do we stand in an international scale at the current moment, sir?
Yeah, I mean, bottom. We are not at any, any good basis. We have one of the oldest laws that are, that is, beyond at the bottom, I would say, right? And there have been certain amendments, there have been certain other laws, when it comes to, slaughtering animals, etc. But still, these, the totality of these laws are disappointing. But now, for example, if you look at certain countries, right? Some countries even regulate, having pets, for example, right? Now, for example, if you some countries put certain laws saying that if you have a if you are unable to stay at home with your dog, or having somebody take care of the dog, for example, you cannot have a dog, because just having a dog, you go to work, you come back at 9, you leave at 7, you come at 9, the dog is alone. I mean, animals feel the depression. Animals feel, they have feelings, right? Especially dogs, like wonderful beings. So
cognitively develop.
So definitely, right? So just we as a nation need to start taking responsibility. This is the basic idea of accountability. We want to have a dog, you have a dog, then be responsible for the dog, right? It's actually like having a child. You have to take certain measures. You just feel, okay, one day I'm so bored, I'm going to go tomorrow and find a dog, right? And that's that. And then you feel like, oh my God, I cannot take care of the dog. I'm just going to, just put the dog somewhere. And that is not the way, civilized, nations, people of civilized nations should behave. And this is not the standards around the world. Now, for example, one thing that I would like to touch from last point to now, touching international standards, right? Internationally, you see this pet shop, right, culture is regulated. You have to have certain license, and this bill is aiming for that standards actually. Now, I saw some time back, I think 2 or 3 weeks back, right, around Piliyandara, when I was driving, a person in his Alto, he had 4 or 5 little, German Shepherd puppies, and he was there from, I think, I asked him, how long were you there? He was here from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So in this scorching sunlight with these little puppies, he's trying to show them and get to sell for just random people, and these dogs are in these little cages, right? And they are being literally like barbecued in these cages, So this person, being on the phone, he's on AC in his vehicle, but this dog's outside and just, weeping and barking. It's unfortunate because now he knows that no issue. The pet company, so if you want to sell pets, it's not regulated. You can just, make tiny small cages, go even in the rain or in the sun, and just try to sell these.
There's no bodyguard.
There's no real framework to govern. So people just do whatever they want. I mean, that's the problem. If you remove these sanctions, if you remove these legal frameworks, if you remove all of this, our people, we have this culture where people just do whatever they want. Unfortunately. So by putting these legal frameworks, by putting these procedures, you are now going to fine the people, putting fines to the people. You will hold people accountable, and once you start arresting and prosecuting few people, I'm sure once this goes to media, this bill will start. This when it becomes act, it will start to speak for itself, and people will think twice, if not thrice, before doing this kind of selfish, inhuman, brutal activities dealing with animals. Whether it's like putting fire to a animal just because you are in a bad mood, or putting a fire just because this animal is like barking at night, or you want to make a quick buck, so you breed some good brands and try to sell outside, or just leaving your dog in the temple and going abroad. I mean, whatever it is, this will make people to think.
Right. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left. Specifically considering the international aspects as well, I'd like to ask you now, we know that the bill, if it is coming to enactment, will seriously revolutionize the landscape that we have when it comes to the protection of animals in general in Sri Lanka. Do you believe that if the bill does come into enactment, we will see a drastic improvement in our standing on an international scale? Or do you believe it's not just the animal welfare bill and there's other things that need to be done in order to increase our standing?
I'll take the US animal laws, for example, to start up. Quickly, I know the time is going fast. So, from 1910, right, onwards, right, 1910 onwards, you saw gradual improvements of animal laws. And US is a federal state. So, you had states, like New York States, right, New York State or Florida State, all the 50 states, different states, they have their own laws, and there are certain federal laws also and these laws have been updated almost every decade, right? The laws keep updating despite any political change. The laws kept updating, right? So our current proposed bill is I would say 1980, 1990, 2000 parallel level update to that kind of a system, right? And I'm not saying this bill is everything you need, but this is, I would say, largely a step in the right direction towards we are harmonizing our legal framework with the international, right, a legal framework. And if you take Canada also, right, or even you take one of Australia, New Zealand also, like you see that this bill is somewhat parallel to their legal system in terms of protecting animals as of the 2005, because at that time our drafters use all those jurisdictions to gather up and formulate this piece of law. So I think it would to some extent fit in with the modern 21st century animal law legislations around the modern developed world. And I think if you look at even India, for example, the Indian animal protection law is far more superior with weaknesses. It's still better than what we have. But if we are able to enact this, and I pray, I plead with authorities and the powers maybe to make this happen this year in 2024, right? This would put us, in a good standing with the international animal rights legal framework, and this would make Sri Lanka a civilized nation. right? Because as per the current legal framework, almost we cannot say it's very civilized,
Very draconian.
Yes, very rather than draconian, it's very underdeveloped. It's so this new law will put us in the same standing with civilized nations.
Exactly, so we can have some form of semblance to the actual civilized world, especially considering how a civilized nation should actually be judged is how it treats its most vulnerable parts of society and its most vulnerable individuals. And obviously, if we look at any vulnerable group, the ones that are voiceless are probably the most vulnerable in any context, any situation, any nation. Unfortunately, we have come to time in these discussions. Time has come against us. There's a lot for us to discuss, but we'll have to leave it off here. Thank you very much for taking the time to explain to our audience. I'm sure they walked away with a lot more new information regarding the Animal Welfare Bill, how it's not just another amendment to the existing ordinance, and that we can see true change if it is to be enacted. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
You're very welcome, Anuradhi.
Well, as humans, animals have been in existence to our advantage for millennia. We have unfortunately been quite exploitative of their presence, and it truly brings into question the collective moral compass we have as a society. Therefore, it's important that we strive for better standards for our four-legged friends. We leave you tonight with the words of author Daphne Sheldrick. It's not enough to love animals, we must actively protect them and preserve them. It's our duty and responsibility as custodians of this planet. That's all we have for you tonight on Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/OtherDerana English. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.